requirements were for large amounts of parking, one parking space per unit, and we see 50% of the parking spots aren't used. On the other hand, if we wouldn't attend to parking at all, there would be too much street congestion. So we're proposing that we have significant amount of parking located in a parking ramp here. Now, as you can see, what we've done is we've concealed the parking ramp from the street. We have chosen building, we've kept the parking ramp low enough so that from State Street and from Mechanic Street, and even from the Mews, you really won't see this parking ramp. So it's hidden. It's there, it's useful, it serves the purpose, but it is hidden and pushed away. Because we really don't want to celebrate parking. We'd rather celebrate the places people live and pay places that people go to purchase bread and such. So then what we're doing in the back of the site, this is where we're locating the largest portion, 7-story multifamily building that is pushed far back from Mechanic Street and pushed back from State Street. And as you recall, at this portion of State Street, this is where the road, State Street is blocked. There's construction going on under the I-91 overpass. And so I believe that a taller building at this point really can begin to terminate State Street, because once we hit I-91, we're actually using this very interestingly, like some suburbs, or actually garden suburbs, have used taller buildings to block the highway or the railroad from the neighborhood. So this serves two purposes. It serves the purpose of having a taller building, and at the same time is acting as the wall that separates the building from the nasty, noisy highway. This is just a plan, a ground floor plan, beginning to illustrate how cars enter, circle around. We've limited the amount of roadway significantly on the site, but they could circulate around and then go into the parking ramp. The parking ramp brings you up to a series of slope levels. Again, all hidden from the street with this existing building, an extension of the existing building, and an extension of the row houses or townhouses that we see on Mechanic Street. And again, you can see the parking garage is hidden by the homes. We have porch entrances to the homes in each of these locations, so that there's a real interaction between that porch and the Mews or the pedestrian circulation that passes through. This is just an example to show you how this is the second floor plan, and it begins to illustrate the number of units and how we have the units distributed. But you'll see something interesting here. What we're doing is we're taking the top of this building and we're extending it out and over, across actually the entrance to the site, the vehicular entrance to the site. And we're doing that so that, again, that street wall that I was talking about that exists on State Street, Lower State Street, Middle State Street, and Upper State Street, we're bringing that street wall and allowing it to actually curve around towards the overpass. This is a three-dimensional drawing of the site. The triangular part, I think, is a very important part of the site, even though it's not part of the site, of course. But what it does is it really sets up this beautiful facade, this beautiful existing facade as being a significant element. And if anything, this is a signature facade. This is where Lawrence Street starts, and in fact, we're thinking that the address for this building should be number 1 Lawrence Street, because this is such a prominent, important, and imposing corner. You can begin to see what we're doing is we're taking the roof line, which is the existing roof line, extending that roof line down State Street or up State Street, and it then forms the base of the taller building as well. That roof line then continues for these townhomes. You can begin to see how these small multi-family homes, similar to the one across Mechanic Street, begin to frame the views that look into the site itself. As I said, we're thinking of this model as a garden suburb, and And so that's been somewhat of our inspiration. But just to take you around, let me look at some of the facades. We have a key here that tells us what facade we're looking at. So right now, that signature facade, that's number 1 Lawrence Street that I mentioned before, is the existing building. And it very nicely turns the corner by changing its shape from a flat facade to a half octagonal facade as it begins to wrap the corner on State Street. And so our intention is to maintain that. The Mechanic Street elevation similarly is a very low-rise elevation, a low-scale elevation, and it extends. This is the existing building. Part of the existing building is over here, and what we're doing is we're adding a second floor onto this existing building. But mostly we are going to have, this is going to be residential to this point, and then our commercial space starts here at the existing building, wraps its way around the corner. So you can see this is the elevation we're looking at here. Now to look at a couple more details, these are the row houses that we had spoken about that would actually be similar architectural vocabulary as the existing building. And you'll see that we're starting to develop a very strong base. You remember that one example of the building I showed you a few minutes ago where it had a strong, hard brick base, and then the upper stories were clad in a softer, lighter material, clapboard essentially. And then as we were at that, sitting on the porch of that blue building that I showed you on Mechanic Street, this is the view that you have into it, where the buildings located on Mechanic Street have 3 entrances. One entrance directly onto Mechanic Street, one entrance onto the Mews, and one in the space between the buildings. And so then as we begin to go around on State Street, again, here this is this commercial wall that I felt was important in keeping. So this is the wall that bends around State Street. And as I had said, what we're doing is we're taking the second floor commercial space and we're bringing that commercial space over the top of the vehicular entrance. The reason we're doing this is we want to downplay the vehicular entrance. We want to make it less imposing, and so that we have this visual that takes you around the corner. And then this roof height then becomes the base height for the taller 7-story building. And similarly, what we're doing is we're beginning to hide the upper stories within the roof lines. And they become less prominent and less important. And not only that, we're setting back this building from the street front as well. So again, that the visual line is, that visual line that we were talking about that exists here is probably, will be the most prominent line as you look down the street. So then, I wanted to show you a little bit of precedent of buildings that do this. This one you're very familiar with. This one you may not be familiar with, but this was Forest Hills Gardens, which was a planned community, which is where the National Tennis Stadium originally was. And this community announces its vehicular entrance in a very similar way, where it downplays the building and the architecture really becomes a more prominent aspect. And again, what it does is it continues over the street, or in this case the vehicular access, it continues the architecture and that definition of that street wall. So this was part of our inspiration for that. And you can see it here in larger scale, how it works. Now, the nice thing about it is there's a beautiful peek into the landscape of the inner court. And then the portion which is where the 7-story building is, I felt it was important to begin to announce somewhat of an end to State Street prior to State Street passing into Fairhaven by using a punctuation point, essentially. This happens to be a stair tower. It serves very functional use. But what we're doing is we're using this to punctuate the building and sort of say this is where things kind of end. And we do have a park here, of course, but there is no longer any architecture that occurs between here and the highway. We're looking at large-scale windows for the upper units. This help break the scale of the building down a bit, but also will become very loft-like in character. And then from the inner court This is how the building would appear. We're standing right now at the end of the mews looking into the court. There is a porte cochere driveway, which residents can then unpack and move into this building. One of the things you'll notice here, that was what we're doing, is we're using a very strong base, like I said, a brick base, which is common and consistent with the neighborhood. And then we use a softer material, either a clapboard or a shingle style vocabulary, again, to soften the upper stories of the building. So this is the bird's eye view that you had seen before. You can see from this the congestion of all the buildings that are located within the site. And then if you look to the next site, you'll see how our plans are to substantially clean up the space. And you'll see we're dedicating much more open space and garden space to the area. We are hiding this parking garage, a necessary evil, but even with respect to the parking garage, we're allowing light to come down into the parking garage, so it's not one of these foreboding parking ramps where you feel uncomfortable. We are bringing natural light into this and to see this as a landscaped inner portion of the building. You can see the green space here, and then just recently, one of our renderers just completed this, and this is sort of hot off the press, but this begins to tell you from a scale perspective how the building actually becomes the final important ending to State Street, and it begins to show you how State Street and that strong urban wall that you have now that exists, we continue around and then really define and make a punctuation point. So these are the plans for the building now. Just some of the statistics that I'm sure you're interested in. We're looking at about 250